So today we'll talk about the analytics and accountability. Keeping your forecast honest. This is the final part of the four-part series. And we have covered why forecasts fail, the data foundation you need, and the forecasting process itself. I hope you have been able to see all those videos. And now let's talk about the analytics and the accountability systems that keep your forecast honest over time. And here are some observations. Companies can implement everything we've talked about in this series: clean data, strict qualification, rigorous deal inspection, and still end up back where they started within 6 months. And why? Why is that? Because they don't measure forecast accuracy, they don't create accountability for it, and they don't continuously improve the process. So let me start with the analytics component that you need to track. Most companies, they track whether they hit their booking number. That's important, but it's incomplete. Why? You need to understand not just whether you hit the number, but whether your forecast was accurate along the way. So the metric one, commit forecast accuracy. This is your primary metric. Each week throughout the quarter, what percentage of your commit forecast actually closes? You should be tracking this week by week, not just at quarter end or 3 times a quarter. Here's what good looks like. Your commit forecast, it should be 90 to 95% accurate. If you're consistently above 95%, you are probably sandbagging. You are being too conservative about what you put in the commit. If you're below 85%, your qualification standards are not strict enough, or your deal inspection process is not working. See how narrow that window is? I've observed companies, they track all of this religiously and use it as a leading indicator. And if your commit accuracy starts dropping, maybe you're at 92% most weeks, but suddenly you're at 84%, that's a signal that something is wrong. Maybe qualification has gotten sloppy. Maybe a new competitor entered the market and you're losing deals to the competitor that you originally thought you'd win. You can investigate and fix it before it becomes a huge crisis. Let's look at metric 2. The stability of the forecast is important. Let's call it forecast stability. How much does your forecast change from week to week? Big swings in your forecast, lots of deals moving in and out of commit, indicate problems with qualification inspection. I recommend tracking what percentage of your week 1 commit forecast is still in commit by week 4 and what percentage actually closes. And what's a healthy pattern? I mean, these are arbitrary numbers, but it'll give you some sense of direction. 85% to 90% of week 1 commit deals, they should still be in your forecast by week 4, and 85 to 90% of those should close. If you're seeing deals disappear from commit throughout the quarter, you're putting deals in commit before they're even ready. If you're seeing lots of new deals enter commit late in the quarter, you're not identifying and qualifying opportunities early enough. I worked with a company where the forecast was like a revolving door. Deals constantly moving in and out of commit. When we analyzed it, we found that only 60% of the week 1 commit deals was still in commit by week 4. The forecast was basically meaningless. So we tightened the qualification standards and we implemented the deal inspection process. And this deal inspection process, by the way, was described in video 3. So go back to video 3 to check that out. Within 3 months, what happened? The forecast stability improved. The forecast becomes something you could actually plan around. Let's look at metric 3, which is around the slip rate that I've been talking about. Slip reasons. Why deal slips? When deals that were forecasted to close don't close, you need to understand why. Was it poor qualification? Did the circumstance revolving around the customer change? Did we lose to competition? And why did we lose to competition? Did the budget get pulled? The decision process took longer than expected. So track this religiously, not to punish people, but to learn. If you are seeing patterns, lots of deals slipping because the customer's decision process took longer than expected, that tells you something about how you qualify and how to forecast deal timing. If you're losing to competition more than you expected, that tells you something about your competitive positioning or your win-loss analysis. I have observed companies that track slip reasons and they cannot predict which deals in the current forecast are at risk. You start to see patterns. Deals with characteristic X will slip maybe 40% of the time, than with character Y. I mean, these are the measures that allow you to forecast accurately going forward. An observation, working with a company that had a persistent problems with deals slipping. And when you analyze the slip reasons, you find that 35% of slips were really because customers' decision process took longer than expected. That's not a customer problem, that's a qualification problem. It means a rep did not understand the decision process when they put the close date in. So you have to retrain the sales team on how to uncover and validate the customer's decision process. We made it a requirement. We made it a required part of the qualification. And when that sank through, within 2 quarters, so slippage, we talked about the slips due to process, took longer than expected, dropped from 35% down to 18%, 17%, huge improvement. The forecast got more accurate simply because people understood what they were forecasting. There's metric 4, you look at the source of bookings. Where did the deals that closed this quarter come from? How long were they in your pipeline? What percentage came from your week 1 forecast commits? Okay. I mentioned all of this last week around the deal foundation and accountability, but it's worth emphasizing. If most of your bookings are coming from deals that were not in your forecast at the beginning of the quarter, you have a pipeline visibility problem. You should know at the start of the quarter where 80 to 90% of your bookings will come from. So track this by cohort. Of the deals you closed this quarter, what percentage were in your pipeline at the start of the quarter? How about 3 months ago, 6 months ago? This tells you about your pipeline development and your sales cycle, and it helps you understand how far ahead you need to be building pipeline to hit future quarter targets. So let's talk about accountability now. Because analytics without accountability, they don't drive behavior change. That's the reality. And here are some observations that I've made over the years. Most companies, they have accountability for hitting your sales numbers. They have that, but few companies have accountability for forecast accuracy. So reps and managers optimize for closing deals. They do not optimize for forecasting honestly. They sandbag, they overcome it, they manipulate the pipeline to look good in the reviews. So you need to create explicit accountability for forecast accuracy. And here's how. 1, make forecast accuracy a performance metric. When you're evaluating sales managers, not just reps, but the managers, forecast accuracy should be one of the metrics you evaluate. It's not the only metric, but a very important metric. You still care about whether they hit their number, but forecast accuracy should be part of the conversation. I've worked with companies that include forecast accuracy in manager comp plans. It's not a huge percent in terms of weighting, maybe 5 to 10% of the variable comp, but enough to create incentive to forecast honestly rather than optimistically. 2, do forecast retrospectives. At the end of each quarter, sit down with your CRO and your sales leadership and review what happened. What was the week 1 forecast? What actually closed? For deals that slipped or did not close, why? What can we learn? What should we do differently next quarter? This is not about blame, it's about learning, but it does create accountability. If the same manager is consistently over forecasting by 20 to 30%, that needs to be addressed. If certain types of deals consistently slip, that needs to be addressed. I worked with a company that implemented quarterly forecast retrospectives with their sales leadership team. It's the same company I'm talking about. And the act of reviewing forecast accuracy publicly created this behavior change. Managers started being more careful about what they committed to because they knew that they would have to explain the misses to their peers and to the exec team. Celebrate the accuracy. That's point number 3, not just attainment. Most sales cultures celebrate the person who beat their quota who beat their quota and they have all the leaderboards, right? And that's fine, that's great. But you should also celebrate people who, as a team, forecast accurately. The rep or manager whose forecast was within 3% of actual every single week. That is a behavior you want to encourage. I've observed companies create forecasting excellence awards. Small recognition is not going to compete with, President's Club to Hawaii or Mexico, but it signals that the companies value forecasting accuracy. And I've seen it work. It shifts a culture from commit big and hope to commit accurately and deliver. So let me talk to you about the hardest part of creating forecast accountability. What do you do when the CRO or sales leadership is a problem? More often than not, I've observed, and I would like to admit, the CRO knows the forecast is shaky but commits to it anyway because that's what the board wants to hear, or the CEO wants to hear. Or they sandbag aggressively because missing the forecast is worse for their career than leaving revenue on the table. Or they tolerate sloppy forecasting from their team because holding people accountable is uncomfortable. So if you're the CFO, this is where you need to have a direct conversation with the CEO. The forecast exists to help you run the business, not to manage board expectations. If the forecast is not reliable, you need to fix that, even if it means uncomfortable conversations about sales and about the sales leadership. I've seen companies replace CROs over forecast accuracy issues, and in one instance, not because they miss a number. Missing happens, but because they repeatedly committed to forecasts they knew were unreliable. And it prevented the company from planning and executing effectively. So let me close with some thoughts on continuous improvement. Because forecasting is a capability you build over time, not something you fix once. Every quarter you should be asking, what did we learn? Where was our forecast inaccurate and why? What patterns did we see? What should we change about our process, our qualification criteria, or our inspection rigor? And I've observed that companies that treat forecasting as a continuous improvement discipline, they get better quarter over quarter over quarter. They analyze their misses, they adjust their processes, they train their teams on what they learned. And companies that don't do this tend to make the same mistakes again and again. Here's a personal example of a continuous improvement process in action. I've observed a company that analyzed their forecast misses and discovered that deals involving procurement on the customer side, it slipped 60% of the time. They were not accounting for how long procurement took in their qualification process. They adjusted their qualification criteria. If procurement is involved, we need to understand their process, their qualification process, and we need to have made contact with procurement, and we need to add 2 weeks or 3 weeks to our expected close date. You know what that did? That one changed. It improved the forecast accuracy by 8 to 12 percentage points in the next quarter. There is continuous improvement. You learn from what happened, you adjust your processes, you get better. So let me bring this entire 4 episodes on bookings to a close. Accurate booking forecasts are not magic. They are the result of 1, clean data and strict qualification standards. Don't let garbage into your pipeline. 2, rigorous deal inspection and a structured forecasting process. Manage the forecast week by week. 3, analytics that give you visibility into forecast accuracy and patterns. 4, accountability systems that reward honesty and accuracy, not just optimism. And 5, continuous improvement based on learning from your misses. Companies can go from plus or minus 20% forecast accuracy to plus or minus 5% accuracy by implementing these practices. And this improvement, by the way, can be transformational. It changes how you run the business. You can plan confidently. You can make strategic decisions in terms of allocations of capital, strategic investments, knowing what resources will be available and what is the revenue you can look forward to. Your board trusts your projections. Your valuation improves because the investors, they reward predictability. And as a CFO, you sleep better at night because you're not constantly surprised by booking results. And this is achievable. It just requires discipline and process and some cultural change. But the companies that do it well, they have an enormous advantage over the competitors who are kind of guessing at the forecast. Thank you for spending these 4 episodes with me. I know these were long episodes. I hope you learned something off it. I would love to hear your comments, but thank you for this journey. I'm learning as much as you are while I'm doing some research on this field, and look forward to seeing you in the next sessions.